Hello, I'm 𝗪𝗵𝗆𝘆, founder of Starlit Contracts. A very warm welcome. We're here to help you negotiate and use contracts with confidence. And this video is part of our Build the Foundation in Contracts program. And our topic is the transfer of risk and title. Let's look at this topic in summary firstly. And what we can say is that when you've got a contract between a supplier and a customer, the point at which title or ownership to a product transfers between the parties can be a different point in time to when the risk of any damage to that product transfers between the parties. How does it work in practice? Well, let's say you as the customer place an order for a product, and when you place the order you pay 100% of the contract price immediately. However, you as the customer have not yet taken possession of that product, so we might agree that any risk of damage to that product would only transfer from me, the supplier, to you, the customer, once you take receipt of that product. In other words, if the product is damaged when it's in transport from me to you, then that would be my responsibility as the supplier. Is this something that you should care about? Well, it really depends. Is your intention for title to a product to transfer at a different time to when risk transfers? If that is the case, then naturally it's important to know what you're signing up for. One tool that you can use to identify when risk will transfer from one party to another is called Incoterms. These are internationally recognized guidelines to evaluate when risk will transfer between the parties. But if you do use them, then make sure that you fully understand what your rights and obligations are. Let's look at a practical example together now. New International Supplier Limited enters into a contract to supply spare parts to foreign-based customer limited. The parties agree when title and risk to the spare parts will transfer from the supplier to the customer. What can go right for the supplier in this situation? Well, the parties might agree that when the customer places their order that they would need to pay immediately 100% of the contract price, or at least they would make full payment shortly after placing their order. The parties might also agree that the supplier must only deliver the equipment or those spare parts X works. Now, X works is a type of Incoterm, and you can look up more about what that means online. But the idea is that the supplier will have delivered those products when it makes them available for collection at their location, or wherever is specified in square brackets after the X work statement in the contract. This means that the customer is responsible for arranging the collection of those products from the site of the supplier. What could go wrong for the supplier? Well, the parties might agree that the title to those products will only transfer from the supplier to the customer after payment in full, and it might be that the customer does not make payment in full for an extended period of time. The result could be that those parts are in the country of the foreign customer for an extended period, and this can create a taxable presence for the supplier in that foreign country. This means that there may be an obligation on the supplier to pay taxes in that foreign country. Whether such a tax burden will arise always depends on the tax laws that are in place in the two countries between the supplier and the customer. So this is something that you should be aware of when you're supplying products to another country. Let's look at a sample clause and some key considerations now, and firstly to the clause. Ownership of the equipment, or it might be a product or spare parts, will transfer from supplier to the customer upon the earlier of payment for the equipment in full and when risk transfers. Now remember our example from the preceding slide. Consider if ownership of that equipment must transfer from the supplier to the customer before it is imported into the country of the customer so that the supplier avoids any tax risk. Also keep in mind that if you're transferring ownership to a product to the customer and you've not been paid in full at the point that ownership transfers, then you're facing a risk as the supplier, because it might be that the customer never pays for that product in full and you might not be able to recover ownership of that product afterwards. Let's continue with the clause now. Risk of damage to the equipment will transfer from supplier to customer upon delivery, free carrier, port of export, Incoterms 2020. There are many different times when risk can transfer when you're using the Incoterms. On the last slide we looked at X works delivery. On this slide we're looking at free carrier delivery. So whichever form of delivery you adopt, make sure that you're entirely familiar with what your rights and obligations are in relation to it. I hope you found this introductory content helpful, but if you're ready for the next step to learn how to negotiate and use contracts with confidence, then check out our website starlitcontracts.com, where you can become a member to access additional content, interactive sessions, and be part of our community. I look forward to seeing you there.